What turns a man into a predator? Is it something buried deep within him since childhood, waiting for the right moment to emerge? Is it years of unchecked desire, growing stronger with every secret thought, every stolen glance? Or is it something else entirely, an urge so overwhelming that it twists the very fabric of morality, making the unthinkable seem justifiable? They don't see themselves as monsters. They tell themselves it's love. They tell themselves it's harmless. They find ways to justify the unjustifiable. Some hide in the shadows, lurking on the fringes of society, too afraid to step into the light. Others wear masks of virtue, stepping into positions of power where trust is freely given. They become teachers. They become coaches. They become priests. And sometimes, they become pastors. For years, Pastor Elijah Matthews stood at the pulpit of New Light Baptist Church in Memphis, Tennessee, his voice ringing through the sanctuary, calling his congregation to righteousness. To them, he was a shepherd, a leader, a man of God, a husband, a father, a son. But within the walls of his home, the reality was far from the image he projected. His wife, Angela, began to notice things she couldn't ignore. His mother, Deborah, started asking questions that made him uncomfortable. And his 14-year-old son, Caleb, he found something that changed everything. They knew the truth. They tried to expose him. And in the end, that cost them their lives. November 12, 2023. Sunday night. 9:45 p.m. Memphis, Tennessee. By the time the first police officers arrived, the house was silent. 3 bodies lay inside. Blood pooled on the floor. A gun sat on the nightstand. A broken family. A shattered illusion. What really happened inside the Matthews home? And how did a man who preached salvation become a killer? Memphis, Tennessee. A city of history, resilience, and faith. In the heart of its black community, churches are more than places of worship, they are sanctuaries. They provide hope, guidance, and a sense of belonging. Among them stood New Light Baptist Church, a towering brick building with white columns and stained glass windows. On Sunday mornings, the choir's voices soared through the rafters, and the congregation filled the pews, dressed in their finest. At the front of it all, leading with authority and grace, was Pastor Elijah Matthews. Elijah Matthews, 45 years old. A man who spoke with conviction, who preached about righteousness, who told his followers that sin had consequences. To the outside world, he was a man of integrity, a devoted husband to his wife, Angela, and a proud father to his teenage son, Caleb. He was deeply respected, not just within his church but throughout the community. People sought him out for guidance. Women whispered that they wished their husbands were more like him. Men admired his discipline. But in the Matthews home, behind closed doors, the image of perfection was beginning to crack. Angela Matthews, 38 years old. She had stood beside her husband for 15 years, supporting his ministry, believing in his calling. She was active in the church, teaching Sunday school, organizing charity drives, and praying with women who came to her for advice. But in recent months something had changed. Elijah was distant. Cold. He no longer looked at her the way he used to. He barely touched his food at dinner, barely spoke to Caleb. He locked his office door now, something he had never done before. Deborah Matthews, 65 years old. A woman of wisdom, the matriarch of the family. She had raised Elijah in the faith, instilled in him the values of honesty and service. She had always been proud of him, always defended him. But in her gut she felt something was off. She had learned to trust that feeling. Then there was Caleb, 14 years old. A quiet, observant boy. He loved basketball, comic books, and video games. He looked up to his father, wanted to make him proud. But recently, he had begun to feel uneasy. It started with the way his father reacted when he entered the room, flinching, minimizing browser windows, snapping his laptop shut. The way he suddenly became overly protective of his phone, keeping it on silent, never leaving it unattended. Then, late one night, Caleb heard something, his father's voice, speaking in hushed tones. He crept closer to the office door, barely breathing. The conversation was strange. A whisper. A giggle. A name he didn't recognize. Then his father said something that made his stomach turn. Caleb didn't sleep that night. The next day, when his father left for a church event, Caleb sat at his father's desk. The laptop was still warm. He hesitated, but his instincts told him to keep going. A few keystrokes. A few clicks. And then, there it was. Files. Images. Messages. Things no child should ever see. His hands trembled. His heart pounded. He knew what he had found, but he didn't understand how it was possible. His father, the man who stood in front of the church every Sunday, the man who baptized people, the man who warned others about sin, it didn't make sense. That night, Caleb told his grandmother. Deborah listened carefully, watching her grandson's face. He wasn't lying. He wasn't mistaken. And deep down she knew. She had always known something wasn't right. She didn't tell Angela right away. She needed proof. So, over the next few days, Deborah started paying closer attention. Watching Elijah's movements. Watching the way he reacted to certain topics, the way he recoiled when someone mentioned a missing child in the news. Then she checked his phone. His cloud storage. His deleted files. And that was it. Angela's world shattered when she saw it for herself. The man she had pledged her life to, the man she had built a home with, she could never look at him the same way again. Now there was only one thing left to do. Expose him. Stop him. Their mistake? Confronting him directly. Because by the time they realized what he was capable of, it was already too late. The moment Elijah Matthews realized his secret was at risk, everything about him changed. The confident, charismatic pastor who once stood at the pulpit, delivering sermons with ease, began to falter. His voice wavered. His hands shook. His once carefully structured messages turned into something else. Warnings about betrayal, fiery condemnations of those who dare to spread lies. He spoke about God's punishment, about how the devil was working through those closest to you, about how some sins could never be forgiven. His congregation didn't understand why his sermons had taken such a turn. They whispered among themselves, exchanging glances in the pews. But they trusted him. They believed in him. And that was all Elijah needed. At home, his behavior became erratic. He barely slept, pacing the house late into the night, his shadow moving from room to room. Angela would wake up to find him sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. He kept his phone close to his chest, deleting messages as soon as they arrived. His office door was always locked. Then came the disappearances. Some nights, he wouldn't come home until the early hours of the morning. Angela would hear the front door creak open, the floorboards groan under his weight. The smell of alcohol, of sweat, of something off would follow him inside. She stopped asking where he had been. She already knew she wouldn't get an answer. And Deborah, she saw it too. The way her son avoided her eyes, the way he flinched when she spoke his name. There was a weight pressing down on the Matthews home, thick and suffocating. And they all felt it. Angela and Deborah's next steps. Angela and Deborah knew they couldn't keep this to themselves. The evidence was too strong. The danger was too real. So they turned to the people they thought would help them, the church elders. It was a meeting held in secret, in the back room of New Light Baptist Church, long after the Sunday service had ended. Angela placed a flash drive on the table. Deborah sat with her hands folded in her lap, her knuckles white. "We need your help," Angela said, her voice shaking. One of the elders, a man who had known Elijah for years, leaned forward, glancing at the drive but making no move to touch it. "Help with what?" Deborah didn't hesitate. "With stopping him." Silence. The air in the room shifted. Then came the questions. "Are you sure you saw what you think you saw? Do you understand what you're accusing a man of God of? You need to be careful about spreading lies." Angela's stomach turned. This wasn't a discussion. It was a warning. The church elders wouldn't help them. They refused to believe it. And so, Angela made a decision. If the church wouldn't do anything, the police would. Angela didn't know that Elijah had overheard her phone call. She had stepped into the kitchen, speaking in a hushed tone, clutching the counter with trembling hands. I have the files. I have everything. I just need to bring it in. Elijah stood in the hallway, listening. His heart pounded so loudly he could hear it in his ears. His vision blurred. His secret was slipping through his fingers. And if there was one thing Elijah Matthews had learned in his years as a pastor, it was that God forgives, but men do not. That night, November 12, 2023, the Matthews family sat down for dinner at 8:30 p.m. The room was silent, except for the clinking of silverware against plates. Deborah watched Elijah carefully. Caleb barely touched his food. Angela took a deep breath. Her hands were sweating. She turned to her husband. We need to talk. For a moment, Elijah didn't move. Didn't blink. Then, slowly, he set his fork down. At 9:45 p.m., less than 2 hours later, 3 bodies lay inside the Matthews home. Blood pooled on the hardwood floors. The house that once held Sunday morning prayers now held only silence. 9:45 p.m., the Matthews home, Memphis, Tennessee. The house was still. No sounds of evening prayers. No gospel music playing softly in the background. No murmurs of a family winding down after Sunday service. Only silence, and the thick scent of blood. The first to die was Deborah Matthews. She had always known something was wrong with her son. She had seen the change in his eyes, the way his sermons shifted, the way he recoiled from her questions. But she never imagined she would die at his hands. The kitchen was where she took her last breath. Elijah had approached her from behind. She turned, startled, but before she could react, the knife plunged deep into her stomach. The pain was instant, searing, as he twisted the blade. She gasped, gripping his arms, but he didn't stop. He pulled it out and stabbed her again. And again. By the time she collapsed onto the tile floor, her own son standing over her, her blood spreading in a dark pool around her, she realized something. This wasn't just rage. This was planned. And then, she was gone. Angela Matthews was next. She had been in the bedroom, sorting through the evidence she planned to bring to the police the next morning. She had no idea that her mother-in-law was bleeding out just down the hall. She barely had time to register the shadow in the doorway. Angela's final moments were filled with confusion. She saw the gun in his hand. His gun. The one he kept in his office drawer. Elijah? Her voice was small, uncertain. Her mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. And then, a gunshot rang out. The first bullet hit her shoulder. The impact sent her crashing to the floor. Pain shot through her, but she tried to move, tried to crawl away. She reached for her phone, but never made it. The second bullet, a direct shot to the chest. She gasped, her vision going blurry, her pulse slowing. Her husband, the father of her child, the man she had loved and trusted, had just taken her life. That left one person. 14-year-old Caleb Matthews. He hadn't heard the gunshots. Not yet. His bedroom was at the far end of the hall, music playing through his headphones. He was still scrolling through his phone when his bedroom door creaked open. Caleb looked up, expecting to see his mom or grandma. Instead, he saw his father. Elijah stood in the doorway, covered in blood. A shiver of fear ran down Caleb's spine. He knew. "Dad?" Elijah didn't answer. Slowly, he stepped forward, closing the door behind him. And Caleb realized he had no way out. The last moments of a child, the struggle wasn't quick. Caleb fought. He kicked, he punched, he tried to scream, but Elijah was stronger. His hands wrapped around his son's throat, pressing down, cutting off his air. The boy's lungs burned. His vision swam. His fingers clawed at his father's arms, but the grip only tightened. And then, everything went black. When it was over, Elijah gently laid his son's lifeless body on the bed. He reached for the Bible on the nightstand. Flipping through the pages, he stopped at a verse. One he had used in his sermons before. One about obedience. He underlined it. And then, in the margin, he scribbled a final note. God forgives all sins. Elijah's attempt to escape the murders had taken less than 20 minutes. But covering it up, that was his real challenge. Elijah knew he needed a story. Something believable. Something that would shift the blame. So he picked up his phone and dialed 911. His voice was frantic, breathless, but forced. Please! I need help. Someone broke into my house, my family, oh God, my family! He faked sobs. Gave a panicked address. Then he ran to the kitchen and knocked over a chair. He opened the back door, to make it look like someone had broken in. And when the police arrived just minutes later, they found Elijah Matthews sitting on the front steps, covered in his family's blood. His hands shook. His eyes were red. His voice trembled as he told the officers what had happened. But there was one problem. Forensic evidence doesn't lie. And Elijah Matthews? He had made mistakes. The case begins to unravel within an hour. Investigators were picking apart his story. The back door? No signs of forced entry. The knife used to kill Deborah? Still in the kitchen sink, wiped down, but not well enough. The gun? Registered to Elijah. And then came the biggest mistake of all. Gunpowder residue. It was on his hands. His clothes. The sleeves of his shirt. And when detectives checked his phone logs, they found no call to 911 before the murders. Elijah had only dialed for help after his entire family was dead. The evidence was stacking against him. And soon, his web of lies would collapse completely. Elijah's interrogation. A man without remorse. The interrogation room was cold, silent except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. Across the table sat Elijah Matthews, still dressed in his blood-stained clothes. His hands were cuffed, but he sat with perfect composure, like a man who had already made peace with his actions. Detectives expected tears. A breakdown. Some moment of humanity. Instead, Elijah closed his eyes and whispered scripture. The wages of sin is death. His voice was calm. Unshaken. One of the detectives leaned forward. Elijah, your family is dead. You killed them. You can either tell us the truth, or we can let the evidence do the talking. Silence. Elijah finally lifted his head. His eyes were hollow. Empty. I was cleansing my family of sin. The words chilled the room. The detective paused, staring at him in disbelief. Cleansing them? Elijah nodded slowly. They turned against me. They turned against God. His voice was eerily flat, almost rehearsed. The lead detective had heard confessions before, but never like this. There was no panic, no regret, no anger. Only certainty. Elijah leaned forward, staring into the detective's eyes. You wouldn't understand. And in that moment, the officers in the room realized, this wasn't just a man who had lost control. This was a man who truly believed he had done the right thing. The trial of Pastor Elijah Matthews was one of the most explosive cases Memphis had ever seen. The courtroom was packed, journalists, church members, former congregants, all desperate to understand how a man of God could commit such a monstrous act. Prosecutors painted a haunting picture, a man who lived a double life. A pastor who preached purity while hiding depravity. A husband, son, and father who murdered his own flesh and blood to protect his darkest secrets. The jury listened as forensic analysts dismantled Elijah's alibi. The blood spatter. The gunpowder residue. The faked break-in. Everything pointed to premeditation. Then came the most damning evidence. The laptop. Investigators had combed through Elijah's devices. What they found was sickening. Hidden folders. Inappropriate messages. Years of concealed predatory behavior. His own son, Caleb, had found the evidence, and paid with his life. The prosecution rested their case, leaving only one question for the jury: Was there ever a chance Elijah Matthews was innocent? It took them just 3 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty. 3 counts of first-degree murder. Life in prison. No parole. The community's reaction, denial and betrayal. New Light Baptist Church was never the same. The congregation had worshipped under Elijah Matthews for 15 years. They had trusted him, loved him, believed in him. In the days after his arrest, denial spread like wildfire. Some refused to believe it. The devil is working against Pastor Matthews. This is a test of our faith. Church elders stood by him, at first. They released statements claiming Elijah was being framed, that he was a victim of false accusations. But when the trial ended, and the truth was laid bare, silence fell over the church. Congregants left in waves. The church building itself became a ghost of what it once was. Attendance dropped. Donations dried up. People couldn't worship in a place built on lies. Then came another bombshell. Were there other victims? As investigators continued digging into Elijah's past, another question arose. Was this the first time? The files on his laptop suggested years of hidden abuse. Then, an anonymous tip came in. A former church member, a woman now in her 20s, came forward. She claimed that when she was just 12 years old, Pastor Elijah had taken an unusual interest in her. It started with small things. Special attention. Extra Bible lessons. Then, something much worse. She had told no one. She had been too afraid. And now, she wasn't the only one. More women came forward. Stories of manipulation. Coercion. Signs that Elijah Matthews had been a predator for years. The church elders had covered it up. They had known. And instead of protecting the innocent, they protected their pastor. Elijah Matthews will never walk free again. His life now consists of a prison cell, concrete walls, and the whispers of other inmates who know exactly what he is. The same Bible he once held in the pulpit now rests on the floor of his prison cell. He still reads it. Still prays. Still believes he was right. But the world has moved on. His church has closed its doors. His congregation has scattered. His name will forever be remembered, not as a man of God, but as a murderer. And his family? They never got justice. Because even with Elijah behind bars, nothing could bring them back. Do you believe evil is born, or made? How many other cases like this have gone unnoticed? And how many people still sit in church pews, worshipping a monster they don't even realize is among them? Did Elijah Matthews always have this darkness inside him? Or did power and secrecy turn him into a monster? His story is one of deception, betrayal, and unimaginable loss. But how many more are out there? Hiding behind positions of trust, shielded by the very institutions meant to hold them accountable? This case raises an urgent question: what should churches, and society as a whole, do to prevent predators from thriving in plain sight? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Should churches have stricter oversight? Should members be more willing to question authority? And most importantly, how can we make sure another tragedy like this never happens again? If you want more real-life crime stories that expose the darkest corners of humanity, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Because every crime has a final truth, one that deserves to be told.